My name is Caramelling. I am 32 years old. And the afternoon my mother stood in the private dining room of Hawthorne Gardens and told 30 of her closest friends that I had abandoned her was the afternoon I finally understood that the story a person tells about you is not the same thing as the record of what you actually did. She was mid-sentence when I walked in. The room was arranged with round tables, each set with white linen and small flower arrangements in low vases. Someone had strung a banner along the back wall. The guests were mostly women my mother's age, a few couples, two of my aunts, my mother's oldest friend Diane, who had known our family since before I was born. My mother was standing near the window with a glass of water, and she was talking to a group of four women I recognized from her book club, and what she was saying, clearly and without apparent self-consciousness, was that her daughter had not come to see her in 3 years. "My daughter never once came," she said. "Not once. I have been here alone." I was standing in the doorway with a paper bag containing the raspberry preserves she had asked me to bring, and a birthday card I had spent 20 minutes choosing. I had driven 41 minutes. I had left work 45 minutes early to make it before the party started and had arrived, according to my phone, at 2:53, which was 7 minutes before the listed start time. The four book club women were looking at my mother with the expressions people wear when they're being told something that confirms what they have already been prepared to believe. I set the paper bag on the table nearest the door. I picked up a napkin from the same table, folded it once, and set it down again. I found my seat. I had been assigned to a table near the window, away from the main grouping, and I sat down and poured myself a glass of water from the pitcher already there. What none of those 30 guests knew was that the woman at the reception desk in the main corridor, 30 feet from the private dining room door, had been signing me in every week for 3 years. She kept the visitor log in a spiral-bound notebook at the left side of her desk, and she initialed each entry after I signed, and at the end of each month, she transferred the entries to the facility's electronic system and archived the physical pages in a binder in the back office. The current volume was on her desk. I had signed it 41 times. I did not know in that moment that she was aware of what my mother had just said. I did not know that the partition between the private dining room and the main corridor was thinner than it appeared, or that the reception desk sat close enough to that partition that the words had carried. I did not know any of that yet. I knew only that I had driven 41 minutes, and that my mother was telling her friends I had never come, and that I had folded a napkin and sat down and poured myself a glass of water. That was what I had. My mother had moved to Hawthorne Gardens 3 years and 4 months before her 70th birthday party. The move had been her decision, and also, in the particular way of decisions that are presented as choices when the underlying situation has already narrowed the options considerably, partly not her decision. She had lived in the house where I grew up until she was 66, a 2-story colonial in the town where I was born, 38 miles from the city where I now lived and worked. My father had died 6 years before the move, and my mother had managed the house alone for the years between, with the support of her neighbor Mrs. Petrova and her own considerable organizational capability, which had not diminished with age so much as concentrated into a smaller set of priorities. What had happened to diminish her independence was a fall. She had come down the stairs in the dark at 3 in the morning to get a glass of water. She had always been a light sleeper, had always kept a glass on the kitchen counter, and her foot had caught the edge of the last step, and she had gone down on her left side and broken her wrist and, more significantly, cracked 2 ribs. She had been on the kitchen floor for 4 hours before Mrs. Petrova had noticed the lights and come over. The ambulance had taken her to the regional hospital, and I had driven to meet her, and she had spent 6 days there and 4 weeks at a rehabilitation facility, and then come home to a house that had suddenly, in the way that falls do, made visible all the ways it was no longer safe. We had talked about the options. I had sat with her at the kitchen table where we had always sat, and we had gone through the list. Modifications to the house, a live-in aid, a smaller apartment, an assisted living community. My mother had asked good questions and had listened to the answers with the attention she brought to most things and had said, at the end of that first conversation, that she wanted 2 weeks to think about it. She had come back 2 weeks later with Hawthorne Gardens already selected. She had done the research herself, had called 3 facilities, visited 2, made notes on a yellow legal pad in the precise handwriting she had used all her life. Hawthorne Gardens was newer, had a specific program for residents who were still largely independent but needed a supported environment, and had a private dining room that could be reserved for family events. She had liked the staff. I had supported the decision. I had helped her pack, had arranged the sale of selected furniture, had been present on the moving day, and had stayed for the first 3 nights in the guest apartment the facility provided for exactly that transitional purpose. I had left her with her own furniture arranged as close to her preferences as the room's dimensions allowed, with her books on the shelves in the order she preferred them, with a framed photograph of my father on the table by the window. I had driven home at the end of the 3rd night and had cried in the car for a portion of the drive, which I mention because it is accurate and because the accuracy matters to this story. I had started visiting the following Saturday. I had visited every Saturday since, with 3 exceptions. A week when I had been in the hospital myself for a minor procedure, a week when the facility had been under a respiratory illness quarantine and no visitors had been permitted, and a week when a highway closure had added 3 hours to the drive and I had turned back and come the following day instead, a Sunday. 41 visits over 3 years and 4 months. I had signed the visitor log each time. My name, the date, the time in, and the time out. Dorothy Reyes, who was the facility's daytime receptionist and had been at that desk for 11 years, had initialed each entry. I had brought things on many of those visits. The raspberry preserves my mother liked, which she could not get at the facility's kitchen. Library books on the topics she was currently interested in. A specific brand of hand cream she had been unable to find locally. Crossword puzzle books. A particular style of pen she preferred. I had kept a running list on my phone of the things she had mentioned needing or wanting, and I had worked through the list each week before I drove out. I had also brought myself, which is the part that does not appear on a receipt, but that is also, I came to understand, a category of contribution. I had not done this in secret. My mother had known I was coming each week. We had talked on the phone on Wednesdays, and she had told me what she needed, and I had come on Saturdays with what she had asked for. We had spent the visits in her room, or in the common garden, or, on days when she wanted it, in the private dining room that she sometimes reserved for the 2 of us. We had talked about ordinary things. The book she was reading, a decision I was navigating at work, a recipe she had been thinking about, the weather, the news. The visits had not always been easy. My mother is a person who has a version of events that she maintains with considerable consistency, and that version does not always match the version I have of the same events. This is not unusual. It is the ordinary friction of a long relationship between 2 people with different memories and different needs and different ways of understanding what happened between them. We had navigated it, visit by visit, with varying degrees of success. What I had not known, or rather, what I had not understood the significance of, was that my mother was also telling a different story to her friends. I had not known the shape of the other story. I had not known it had been building for months, or that it had a specific narrative structure, or that she had been sharing it at the book club meetings that took place at Hawthorne Gardens twice a month and at the Thursday afternoon social hours, and in the phone calls she made to the friends who still lived in the town where we had grown up. I had not known any of that until the party. I work in hospital administration. I have been a patient services coordinator at a regional medical center for 6 years, which means I spend most of my working hours managing the interface between patients and the institutional systems that are trying to care for them: insurance authorizations, care plan documentation, discharge coordination, family communications. I am, by professional training and by temperament, a person who documents things. I create records because records protect people. I have watched, enough times to have lost count, what happens when records do not exist and the only available account is a disputed one. It was this professional habit, the same one that had kept the list on my phone, the same one that had made me observe and file, and note things without always knowing why, that had made me save the receipts. I had not saved them strategically. I had saved them the way I save everything because discarding receipts requires a decision to discard them, and I tend to defer those decisions. The bag of raspberry preserves generated a receipt. The library book I bought rather than borrowed because she wanted to keep it generated a receipt. The specific hand cream. The pen refills. The gas for the 41 drives. I had not organized them into anything. They were in an accordion folder on the shelf in my home office along with the warranty cards and the dental bills and the documentation from my own hospital stay. None of it organized, all of it there. I had not thought about the folder in connection with my mother until the party. I sat at my table near the window for an hour and 40 minutes. The party had the structure of events that have been planned by someone who is skilled at the surface arrangements: good food, the right number of flowers, a birthday cake brought out at the correct moment with the correct number of candles. My mother moved through the room with the ease of a person in her own environment, which Hawthorne Gardens had become over 3 years. She knew the staff by name. She knew which guests needed to be introduced, and which had already found each other. She gave a brief speech that was warm and specific, and that made several people in the room laugh at the right moments. She did not, during the hour and 40 minutes of the party, acknowledge that I was there. This was not, I want to be clear, a dramatic exclusion. She did not point at me or direct attention to my presence or absence. What she did was the quieter thing. She moved through the room and spoke to every person in it and did not reach the table near the window. She spoke to both of my aunts. She spoke to Diane, who was seated 2 tables from me and who glanced at me twice during the party with an expression I could not entirely read. She cut the cake and distributed the plates and accepted the cards and said thank you to each person who gave her one. When the party ended and the guests began to leave, my mother came to my table. She sat down across from me and said she was glad I had come. "I brought the preserves," I said. "They're in the bag by the door."
"Thank you," she said.
We sat for a moment.
"Mom," I said.
"The book club women. What you said." She looked at me with the particular quality of attention that is not quite meeting and not quite avoiding. "I've had a hard year," she said.
"You've had a hard year," I said.
"I know. I've been here for it." She was quiet. "I've been here every Saturday," I said. "For 3 years. Dorothy has the log." My mother looked at her hands. They were folded on the table in front of her. She has always folded her hands when she is thinking, a physical habit I have had my entire life to observe. "People exaggerate," she said, "when they're talking with friends." "You said I never came," I said. "That's not an exaggeration. That's the opposite of what happened." She looked up. "You don't understand what it's like," she said. "To be here. To feel like you're," she stopped. "Like you're what?" I said. She did not answer. I sat with the silence for a moment. Then I said, "I need you to understand that what you said today is not accurate. I'm not asking you to make a speech about it. I'm asking you to know that I know the difference." She was quiet for a long time. Her hands were still. "I'm sorry," she said finally. The word had the quality of something that had cost her more than the sentence itself would suggest, which is its own kind of information. "Thank you," I said. I stayed another 40 minutes. We talked about the party, about the flowers, about a book she was reading. I helped carry the flower arrangements to her room because she had asked if she could keep them. When I left, I stopped at the reception desk. Dorothy Reyes was still there, as she always was until 6 on Saturday evenings. She was initialing the day's entries in the visitor log. She looked up when I approached. "I wanted to thank you," I said, "for what you did." She looked at me with the measured directness of someone who has been in the same job for 11 years and has developed a clear idea of what her job involves. "I didn't do anything," she said. "I just stood in the doorway long enough for the people at your table to see me holding the log." I looked at her. "I've been signing you in every Saturday for 3 years," she said. 41 times. "I know what the record says." She closed the log and set it on her desk. "Sometimes the record needs to be visible." I thanked her again and drove home. Diane called me on the Tuesday after the party. Diane had known my mother since they were in their 20s, which meant she had known me since before I had any reliable memories of being known. She was precise and warm in equal measure, the kind of person who does not waste words but who chooses them carefully enough that the ones she uses land exactly where she intends them. "I saw Dorothy come to the doorway," she said, "when your mother was talking." "I know. The other women saw, too." A pause.
"Kara,
how long has your mother been saying these things?" "I don't know when it started," I said. I didn't know she was saying them. "It's been at least 6 months, Diane said. The book club. Some of the Thursday socials. There's a version of things that's been circulating and it doesn't match what I know to be true." Another pause. I should have said something sooner. I wasn't certain, and then I thought it would resolve, and then it didn't. You're saying something now, I said. I am. A brief silence. What are you going to do? I had been thinking about this since the party. I had not arrived at a single clear answer, which is different from not having thought about it. I'm going to keep visiting, I said. That's the first thing. I'm not going to let this change the record going forward. And I need to understand why she's been saying it. Not to correct the story to everyone who heard it, but for myself. That's reasonable, Diane said. It also may not be enough, I said. No, she said. It may not. We talked for another 20 minutes about my mother, about the move, about the years of small rearrangements that had preceded the fall, and the larger rearrangement that had followed it. Diane had observed things I had not been present for, and remembered things I had been told but not understood at the time. By the end of the call, I had a fuller picture of the last 3 years than I had had before it. What the fuller picture showed was this. My mother had been telling a story about being alone. Not as a lie, precisely, or not only as a lie, but as a way of managing a feeling she did not have the vocabulary for or the willingness to name directly. The feeling was something close to what happens when you give up the house where you raised your children and move to a place where you are well cared for and surrounded by people who are kind to you and still, in some interior room that the kindness cannot reach, feel the absence of the life you had before. She had been telling the abandoned story because it was available and because it put the feeling outside herself, into the behavior of another person where it could be named and understood, and, importantly, where it was not her own. I did not excuse this. I want to be precise about that. What she had said at the party was not accurate, and the people who had heard it had been given a false account, and the fact that the account came from a real feeling did not make it a true account. Both things were true at the same time. The feeling was real, and the story was not, and holding both of those at the same time is the only way I have found to understand what happened. 2 weeks after the party, I brought the accordion folder to a Saturday visit. I did not bring it to confront my mother. I brought it because I had decided that the record needed to exist between us in a visible form, the way Dorothy had made the log visible, not as an accusation, but as a fact. I set the folder on the table in my mother's room, and I spent 20 minutes going through the receipts, the preserves, the hand cream, the pens, the books, the gas receipts with the dates printed on them, the parking receipts from Hawthorne Gardens visitor lot, each one marked with the facility name and the date and the time. My mother sat in her chair across from me and watched. When I finished, I did not say anything immediately. I stacked the receipts back into the folder and set it on the table between us. These go back 3 years, I said. Every week, everything I brought you, and every drive I made to get here. She looked at the folder. I'm not asking you to apologize to the book club, I said. That's your business. But I am asking you to look at this and tell me that you know what it says. She looked at the folder for a long moment. Then she reached out and put her hand on top of it. Her hand on the folder, that small gesture, that physical contact with the evidence, was the clearest thing she had given me. It was not a speech. It was not a full accounting. It was a hand placed on top of 3 years of Saturdays, and I received it as the thing it was. I know, she said. I know you came. We sat with that for a while. Then she asked me what I had thought of the flowers at the party, and I told her, and the conversation moved on the way conversations do when something has been said that needed saying and both people are ready to say something else. I brought the visitor log to the following month's visit. Not the facilities copy. Dorothy had made a photocopy of the 41 pages at my request, without being asked twice, on a machine in the back office. I had had it spiral-bound at a copy shop near my apartment. My name was on every page, in the handwriting I had had since I was 12 years old, with the dates and the times in, and the times out and Dorothy's initials beside each entry. I put it on the shelf in my mother's room, between her dictionary and the collected letters of someone she admired. I did not explain why I put it there. She did not ask. I think she understood. It is still there as far as I know. I have not asked about it, and she has not mentioned it. It is a part of her room now the way all the other things in her room are parts of it, the framed photograph of my father, the hand cream on the table, the crossword puzzle books in the drawer. A record of what actually happened, sitting quietly on a shelf, not requiring anyone to look at it to remain accurate. I still visit every Saturday. The drive is 41 minutes. I still bring the raspberry preserves and the things on the list. I still sign the visitor log at Dorothy's desk, and Dorothy still initials the entry, and the log is still a spiral-bound notebook at the left side of her desk. Diane came to visit my mother for the first time in 2 years on a Thursday in September. She called me afterward and said the visit had gone well. She said my mother had showed her the photograph of my father and had talked about a book she was reading and had mentioned, at some point in the conversation, that I had been there the previous Saturday and had brought her preserves. She mentioned it, Diane said, in the way you mention something that is simply true, not with emphasis, not with qualification. Just a fact, stated in passing, the way facts are when they have settled into their correct place. That was enough. I did not need more than that, and I knew it, and knowing it was its own kind of arrival. The thing about the care director standing in the doorway, the thing I have returned to in the months since the party, is that she did not plan it. She told me she had not planned it. She had heard what my mother said through the partition, and she had picked up the log and walked to the doorway and stood there, and the people at my table had seen her and understood what they were seeing, and then she had gone back to her desk. She had not announced herself. She had not addressed the room. She had simply been present with the record, and the record had done the rest. I think about the difference between those two things, announcing yourself and being present, more than I expected to. There are situations that call for the announcement, for the clear and direct statement of what is true. There are others where the record, simply visible, does enough. The difficulty is in knowing which situation you are in. I did not know. Standing in the doorway of the private dining room with a paper bag and a birthday card, that Dorothy was 30 feet away about to make that judgment on my behalf. She made it correctly. I have thought about what it would have taken for me to make it myself, and I am not sure I would have, not because I did not know what was true, but because I have spent most of my life knowing what was true and deciding that the cost of saying it in the room was higher than the cost of carrying it. That accounting has not always been correct. What I have come to understand in the months since the party is that the cost of carrying it is also a real cost. It accumulates. It does not go away simply because you choose not to name it. The record exists whether or not anyone looks at it, and the record being accurate does not protect you from the false accounts circulating in its place, and at some point the two have to be brought into the same room. Dorothy brought them into the same room. She used a spiral-bound notebook and a doorway, and the particular directness of someone who has been watching a situation carefully for 3 years and understands what it requires. I am still learning what it requires. A record is only useful if it is in the same room as the question it answers. 30 guests were in that room when Dorothy stood in the doorway. Most of them had already heard the other version. Was that one moment, a woman holding a notebook in a doorway, enough to change what they believed? And if it was, what does that say about how much a single visible fact can do? Subscribe for a new story each week. If this one stayed with you, the next one will too. Like if you made it to the end, it helps more than you know.
Bell.